Welcome to Science of Slink, the evidence-based pole podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosie Boa. And just to be very clear, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot treat or diagnose. I'm the type of doctor that does research and reads research articles. And that's part of what we're going to be doing together here in the podcast. We're going to be reading research. We're going to be synthesizing that down into things that you can apply to your pole practice. We're going to be talking with experts in their field and learning more. And overall, just really building our understanding of how bodies work, how we can do pole better, train more effectively, train more safely, and just have a better time overall. So if that sounds like something you're interested in and you want to come get a little bit nerdy with us, come on in. Today, we're going to be talking about mental blocks and some things that can cause them and also some strategies to help get through them. So when I say mental blocks, just to be clear, what I mean is when you're trying to do something physical, on the pole, floor work, whatever it is that you're trying to get, the thing that is stopping you from achieving your goal is not a physical obstacle, right? So you have the flexibility, the strength, the power, the endurance, whatever for the movement you're trying to do. But the thing that's stopping you is emotional, I'm going to say it's not intellectual. You understand the parts of the movement and the way they go together, but it's like your brain just won't let you do it. And this is actually something that I personally struggle with a lot. Those of you who have trained with me know, as a student, know that I'm a very slow learner. I take a very long time to learn new skills. And a big one for me right now that I'm struggling with a lot is trying to take my handstands out into the middle of the room. We'll see if it happens, but it's a big struggle. And the thing is, I know that I can kick up and hold a handstand if I'm within like 2 feet of a wall. So physically, I can do it. It's that mental component of moving away from the wall and that fear that's keeping me from doing it. So if you're struggling with this, same. And this is something that there's actually been a fair amount of research done on, which is fabulous because it shows up in a lot of contexts, physical contexts. So you may hear about paper walls as a term that I've heard some people use. I think that's a little bit more on the martial arts side. In gymnastics, you'll hear people talk about twisties. In baseball, apparently they're called yips. And also this refers to losing a movement you could be able to do, and you can't anymore for, again, this emotional, this psychological reason. And one place that I see them super duper often as a pole teacher is when folks are working on a skill on their second side. And I know, because I've been working with them and I've been watching them doing their conditioning and I'm sort of familiar with their bodies, physically they have the capability. They absolutely can. But it's something about moving on to the second side and thinking about feeling less strong, feeling less secure, that just makes it much harder and you run up into that emotional block. And all this month we are working on inversion type moves, pathways that can lead to inversions in the studios. So it's something that's top of brain for me. So what are some factors that can lead to these sorts of mental blocks? What do we know from the research? So like I said, there has been some work done on this. So one thing that we do know is associated with it is a lot of pressure from teachers and coaches, especially in a competition setting. So I would say if you used to be able to do moves and then suddenly you started competing and you're in a very competitive studio environment and you're starting to lose them, that potentially could be a thing there. And if you want to learn more about that, there's a study by Martin et al. 2019 in the Journal of Clinical Sports Psychology where they talk about that. Also, interestingly, from that study, and I've been doing more digging because I would assume that overall life stress and stressors would be associated with greater mental blocks, but the evidence suggests that for adults, that is not the case. So adults here being people over 18, which is the only folks that I work with. So definitely interesting. If anyone knows of any other relevant work, I definitely would be interested in reading it. There's another thing that we do know is associated both with learning new skills that there's a fear component involved with, and also losing skills, and that is anxiety. So Manuel et al. 1989, wrong century, and Harris 2023 both talk about these in some depth. And this is, are you feeling the emotion of anxiety? But there's also some evidence that people who personality-wise, they have the trait of being anxious, tend to have more physical mental blocks, which sounds like me. Another thing that can definitely lead to mental blocks where there weren't some before is trauma, and capital T trauma, something bad happens. And if that's you, I would say definitely see a specialist, definitely work with a psychologist, a sports psychologist. A pole teacher is not the person to help you with that. Or treating, if you have anxiety that is making it hard for you to live your life, definitely a time to see a mental health specialist. But definitely things to know that, those things, those emotional states coming into something may make it more likely that you're going to face these mental blocks once you're there. So what are some things you can do to help get around it? There's a lot of options. And I think probably the first one to like put a pin in so that you know it's an option is, again, if this is something that's really negatively affecting in your life, working with a mental health specialist, a sports psychologist. There's actually been some research done specifically on mental blocks in sports that's found that EMDR may potentially have some clinical benefits there. So possibly worth reaching out to, the mental health professional you're working with if that's something that they're trained in, possibly. And like I said, there is some evidence. I don't think we have like an effective, this clinical intervention works for everyone who has mental blocks. I don't think that is a thing that exists, but definitely, something worth trying, especially if you're already working with somebody and you can add that in. And just sort of generally, there's been a lot of work on this. So there's a really nice overview from 2009, The Management of Competitive Stress in Elite Sport, which is a chapter in the IOC Sports Psychology Handbook. Handbooks, if you're not familiar, they're really great. They tend to be written by experts in the field as a sort of a baseline introduction for people who are coming into it that have, into that field of specialization that have some background in it. And the general sort of shape of the research so far is that the anxiety that can lead to mental blocks, you can think of as having a physical, a somatic component, and also having a mental component, right? An emotional component. So if you're having more physical reactions, right? You're sweating, your heart rate is really racing, you're noticing a lot of muscle tension, right? Maybe you're gritting your teeth. Those would be sort of somatic expressions of anxiety as opposed to more mental expressions, right? So rumination, so thinking about the same thing over and over and over, perseveration, that sort of like getting stuck on thoughts, particularly negative thoughts, racing thoughts, like you can't get your brain to calm down, would be more on the mental side. And it seems like the sort of techniques that have been explored to help treat these diverge. So some of them are more focused on the physical aspects and some of them are more focused on the mental aspects. And I will say, if we think of anxiety as a high arousal state, right? Like you're in a higher energy situation, that's not necessarily bad for doing things, right? Like a trick that I will often use when I'm doing something that scares me is I'll put on music that I find really motivating. I really love Princess Nokia, so I find that she tends to be really motivating for me when I'm trying to do hard stuff. And that gets me into a higher arousal state, right? Like my heart rate races, I get more excited, I'm more willing to do the thing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like some degree of increase in arousal is not necessarily the same thing as being anxious. It's how do you feel about it and how is it affecting your physical performance? So being, I don't know, if we took it to extremes, being completely still and completely calm and like in deep meditation is not probably when you're going to find your greatest athletic performance, right? So it's a balance, but some things to think about. If your symptoms are mainly physical, then relaxation techniques might be in order, full body guided relaxation, maybe guided breathing. If you're sweaty, put on grip, it's just a pull thing. And, if putting on grip is something that you do often, that sort of like ritual, repetitive, this feels familiar, this feels known, may be helpful in helping you get into a state where you're more ready to do the thing. So something worth trying. And also, if it's really more of a mental thing, really working on mental refocusing and restructuring. So Dr. Chelsea Peretti, who is a sports psychologist that specializes in dancers, suggests if you're having a lot of what if statements, like for pull, what if I fall, and reframing them to so what statements. So for example, if you're working on something up the pole, hopefully you have a spotter or a mat, or you're using a band to spot yourself, right? So what if I fall? Well, so what if I fall? I've got my big thick mat here to help me, right? I've got my spotter here and they'll just safely guide me to the ground, right? It's not that big a deal. And so reframing and restructuring that internal monologue you have going on that is maybe not helpful. It might also be worth a try to play with vergence and some vision drills. So this is from Bowen 2018, and they were specifically looking at panic attacks, but I have had it recommended by a sports psychologist as well to potentially help with general anxiety and mental blocks. So this is a vision drill where you have something pretty close to your face. You probably have a pole. You can use the pole, so a couple inches from your face. Look directly at that for 5 seconds, slow count of 5, and then look a couple feet behind it. So maybe the wall behind the pole for 5 seconds, slow count of 5, and then just check in, see how you feel. That may be effective at helping to reduce your overall anxiety and may make it feel a little bit easier to go into the skill that you're working on. Yeah, worth a shot. I also mentioned Dr. Chelsea Preddy earlier, some other techniques that she mentions. First of all, if you think that it is a mental block, definitely make sure that it is, right? So maybe you're having a hard time inverting because something about going upside down you have, fear around, or maybe you're just lacking strength in a critical component. And this is a great time to work with a coach and have them be like, yeah, you're strong enough, or no, I want you doing more rows or whatever. Working on reframing negative mental self-talk, noticing it, right? Notice if the little voice in your brain is being like, everything's horrible. And working on reframing that. Also modifying the skill so that it is less scary for you, right? So something that I did, so I mentioned at the beginning, working on my handstands, something that's been really helpful for me is I use like a big bean bag and putting it in the middle of the room and then kicking up next to that, right? So if I fall over, I'm going to fall not just on a pole mat, but like on this huge soft bean bag, which really helps me with anxiety and makes me much more willing to actually kick up and do the thing, right? So make changes to the movement, have your coach give you regressions so that it is maybe physically less challenging, but definitely less mentally and emotionally challenging as well. And of course, always seek additional support as needed. If this is something that's really negatively impacting you, you can try tips and tricks and see if they help out. If they do, fantastic. And if they don't, if there's something more serious going on, that's outside of the scope of practice of pole teacher. But, pole scary. We're doing scary shit. So dealing with some amount of fear, I think, is just something that we all have to do as pole dancers. If you have absolutely no fear around anything you've ever done in pole, I would actually consider that kind of worrying. And I would sort of wonder if you have a history of kind of bad injuries because you are not taking things perhaps quite as slowly and carefully as I might prefer. Yeah, I think people who don't have fear are sort of in the bin with people who don't mind any level of pain. And they're people that I worry about a little bit as a teacher, that they will push themselves into things that they're not quite ready yet for physically and end up having a bad time because of it. Also, one last thing that you can try, see if it works, is you can try monitoring your heart rate variability as a tool to measure your just sort of overall stress and anxiety level. So you can get an app. We'll measure this from your finger on your phone if you have one of them, like fingerprint sensors on your phone. And basically what this is looking is how variable is the time between your heartbeats. And you can track this daily as a proxy, as a measure of sort of your general overall stress level. And this can also be really helpful as a tool if you're worried that you might be overtraining, being able to measure that over time and just notice any big changes, because those are going to be indicative that something is going on. So some things that might help: definitely reach out for a specialist for more assistance if you need it. Know that this is normal. This is just a normal part of learning pole. It's just a normal part of doing physical stuff. Every single person, probably every single person that I'm not, a little bit worried about has had this at some point in their dance career as they're learning different pole stuff. So don't worry about it when it comes up. It's just going to happen, and, keep working away at it. Keep making modifications so that things feel more doable to you. Do your conditioning, make things feel physically easier. Get support from your coach, maybe mental health professionals. And yeah, you can definitely get through mental blocks. It may take a while, and that's okay. And it's just part of the learning process. So that's it. That's all I got for you today. Hopefully this was helpful, has given you some room for thought, food for thought. And as always, I got all them citations down there. So feel free to go do some more reading on your own, and I will talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. If you want to do more research on your own, if we talked about specific studies, I always try to have the citations in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. A great place to continue our learning. Speaking of continuing your learning, if you do want to work with me as a pole instructor, I teach online at my online studio, Slink Through Strength, and it would be great to have you come join us. I teach freestyle flow, I teach conditioning, I teach flexibility, and I teach pole in the nerdiest way possible. But we have a good time, and we'd love to have you join us if that sounds like fun for you. And if not, no worries. Either way, I'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.